This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins. Those of you who regularly watch our show know we love to talk to producers, and tonight we have one of the biggest. Here to introduce him, my co-host Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
I think you're about to see this little theater reporter get whomped by the most successful producer in the history of world theater. Cameron Mackintosh produced Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables, Miss Saigon, Cats. He is back on Broadway with a terrific revival of Oklahoma that he has brought over from London, and I'm very happy to have Cameron Mackintosh on Theater Talk tonight. Welcome.
Nice to be here, Michael.
All right, I read in someone's column about some of the cuts that are being made to Oklahoma, because it was running a little long, about 3 hours and 25 minutes, and you brought in Susan Stroman to help Trevor Nunn cut the show, is that correct?
Well, the thing is, there was a rookie reporter working on a paper this morning that completely misrepresented the normal process that happens with a musical, which is you get on the first preview, and then the director, the producer, and the choreographer discuss what cuts were made. And within about 4 days of the first preview of Oklahoma, we'd managed to cut 15 to 20 minutes out of it. So it's now running sort of healthily under the 3 hours, and not, as you reported this morning, that it didn't happen till last week, and it was done solely by Susan Stroman.
Well, I'm sure she wouldn't have done it without the approval and consultation with Trevor Nunn and Cameron Mackintosh.
No, we all did it together, as is normal.
Now, the show ran, though, over 3 hours, I remember, in London. Do you think that New York
shows run over 3 hours at the National Theatre?
Yeah, well, our New York audiences just resist that kind of length in the show?
I think part of the, I mean, one of the reasons these productions have been so fantastic is that they've been reinvented as great classic plays under the auspices of the Royal National Theatre, which is partly funded by my own foundation, which we instigated to set up these classic revivals of great musicals. And the nature of doing something in a non-for-profit theatre where you're part of a major repertoire is that you only have a limited amount of time. And therefore, you know, you have 8 previews. You don't do like we do on Broadway, have 3 to 4 weeks, never mind an out-of-town tryout. And it's only when you have that amount of time that you can actually take out stuff without in any way reducing what's in it. I mean, it's like squeezing an orange and not losing any of the juice. And I would defy anyone, including probably Mary Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein's family, of coming to see the show from the first preview and last night and actually knowing what we've done, because you can't tell.
Well, I know some people in the cast who told me they can't tell where the cuts have been made even.
I mean, that's the art of doing good cutting and pacing, and it's all to do with something settling. I mean, it's why the musical theatre is so great, is because you can't just plug it into your video in the corner and make it happen. You have to actually, it's art.
Shaping it and forming it every night. Yeah. I'm very curious to know, since you're in the thick of it now, streamlining this show, how do you not lose objectivity on a show when you have spent so many years with Oklahoma or any of the shows you worked on? How can you pull back as the producer and say, I can't be wedded to this anymore and I can see it objectively? Or do you ever just get so absorbed in it you lose sight of it and you don't know where to cut, you don't know what to change anymore, and the changes you make aren't really improving it, you're just changing it for the sake of changing it?
I've got pretty good recall, and for me, you know, I mean, I've been involved with Oklahoma for 25 years because I first did it back in London with Jamie Hammerstein, directed it in the late 70s. So I mean, I know how the old version was, even though that wasn't completely a revival. It was a version that was part in the old world and part in the new, using Agnes de Mille's choreography. So actually, I find the knowledge is very, very helpful for me to concisely understand how to why something different is just as good and when it isn't. I mean, there's no point changing things just for the sake of it. But any great piece of writing, and this is a great piece of writing, gets a new generation of artists to find new things in it. And what you try and do is retain the original spirit. You'll never repeat the original spirit of a show. I mean, I've got My Fair Lady on at the moment in London, which is an enormous success. And, you know, I've done that one again 20 years ago. And knowing every nuance, knowing when you know when it worked the first time, that you see it work in a different way but with the same effect the second time, you know you've hit it.
What is it that Trevor Nunn and Susan Stroman and you have found in this Oklahoma that makes it different from the previous Oklahomas?
I think the greatest difference is that Trevor has really discovered the play that inspired Oscar Hammerstein and Richard Rodgers to write it in the first place.
Away We Go.
No, it was Green Grow the
Green Grow the
Lilacs.
Lilacs.
Green Grow the
Way
Lilacs.
We Go was the out-of-town title.
Right.
Discarded title, right.
The discarded title, which was discarded in the Colonial in Boston when it became Oklahoma. So that the whole, he's examined the text of the Rodgers and Hammerstein version from the point of view of the play, and indeed rehearsed the actors and doing readings of both. So you understand the brilliant compression that's in Oscar Hammerstein's lyrics and in Richard Rodgers' music that has taken essence of the play. I mean, the play itself is very surprising. Was full of musical numbers. It had about 15 numbers. I mean, they kept stopping. The characters were always designed to stop and sing, except they sang existing material. And therefore, the idea of turning it into a musical was not that surprising. I mean, and I gather that both Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein had thought of doing it 10 years apart. And so it just turned out to be serendipity when Richard Rodgers said, "Look, I'm not going to be able to do it with Larry Hart. He didn't want to do the subject. Would you do it?"
One of the things about this production that I find striking is, I mean, one doesn't think of Oklahoma as sort of teeming with sexuality, but in this version, you have young, attractive people, and there is this very interesting sexual triangle among Judd and Laurie and Curly. Is that another aspect of the show that you've been concentrating on?
Michael, you obviously don't go out into the country. When there's nothing to do, there's no television, there's no bad columns to write. You want to have a bit. That's natural. That's what happens in the country.
You have a sheep farm, I know.
I have a cow farm, and I see them at it day and night. So I think it's entirely integral to the story of real people in a country where they have to make their own entertainment, and it can't all be music.
They can't all be singing and dancing and hoedowns.
That's part of why the play works so well now, because that one is reminded that this is actually based on real people. I mean, not actual people, but what real people did and what real people dreamt of and what real hardships they went through. It's not a bit of fluff, and it's because, I think partly because the show was revived, and you got carbon copies of the original, and the movie was glossy, and that's what most people's memory of it.
You've taken away the lollipop feel.
It's gone back to what the authors were turned on by.
Right.
And when you do that with anything that's good, it's often a revelation. I mean, how often is Shakespeare revealed? But in fact, it's been a great play for 400 years. So,
Indeed. Let's set the record straight about a couple of things. In London papers, known for their accuracy, you were quoted as saying, after Witches of Eastwick closed, I think, "I'm not going to do new musicals anymore," and that was interpreted as that the great Cameron Mackintosh is retiring from the stage.
What I said, I wasn't going to do new musicals for the foreseeable future, other than projects that I was already working on, of which there are one or two that I've been working on for years, which may come to fruition. What people took that as if I'm not going to do any more shows. And at the moment, I mean, this year alone, I will have opened 7 productions around the world. I mean, I've got Witches of Eastwick opening in Melbourne, in Australia, and in Moscow this year. Oliver opening in Sydney. Les Miserables opening in the first Western musical opening in Shanghai in June. Opens in Mexico. Other productions of Saigon are opening. I've just opened another one in England. Concert tours of Les Miserables.
But why no
It's
new
a very
shows?
busy schedule.
Right, but why no new shows for the foreseeable
I don't want
future?
to do it.
Why?
Why?
I have a huge workload. I mean, I at this moment am producing personally 20 shows around the world.
But one sense is you had a feeling about new musicals, that there was some.
You
too
change
hard.
musicals by bringing your
I
new
know,
sensibility to them.
But I don't happen to want to do it at the moment. It's not something that interests me.
Is it because
I've got my, I own 7 London theatres, which I'm in the process of planning the reinvention of to bring them into the 21st century. And I'm 55, and I'm having a great time, and I'm intending to enjoy my life. I mean, I love the musical theatre, but only so much. I love living in the country. I don't want to be in a darkened black space, completely developing theatre and not living a life.
But I guess what we're pushing towards, and I understand you're wanting to live that life, is are you sort of giving up on the new musicals? I mean,
No.
is there
No,
such
I'm
a
not.
problem you don't want to deal with that
No, it's not.
development anymore?
I'm just not interested in doing it. luckily, when you've been at it as long as I have, and I've been producing musicals for 35 years, one has one's independence, and one can. I've always done, even when I had no money, I've always done what I wanted to do. And the fact is, I don't want to do it for the foreseeable future.
All right,
And I think the new musicals that everyone is desperately searching for are going to come from people of their own generation. Just as when Andrew and Tim Rice and Bubel and Schoenberg and I, we were all within 5 years of each other. We were all in our 30s. And that's the way it goes. You get a new cycle.
Well, do you feel then that your sensibility, your understanding of the public taste and what the public wanted was unrivaled for a long period of time? Do you feel that maybe you don't have your finger on what the public wants anymore, and that's why you're stepping away from doing new shows?
Absolutely not. I have never thought that I had my finger on the public taste. The fact is,
4 of the biggest shows in the history of the theatre.
No, but you misunderstand this. This is again an amateur's point of view. My situation is, I've always done what I've liked. And I've always felt, I've given advice to any up-and-coming producer, is do what you passionately believe in, do it well, and then with a bit of luck, the public will come. I had no idea with Cats or Les Miserables or any of these shows that the public were going to flock. Indeed, the proof of the pudding was that all of these shows opened with a tiny advance, and everybody in the theatre saying exactly like they said about Oklahoma, no gals, no gags, no chance. Any time the people in the business say, that's not going to work, it usually does. And every time they go, oh, it can't fail to be a hit, it usually flops.
That's good. That's good advice.
And I'm as surprised as anybody that what I've liked has been liked by so many people and so frequently with different shows. So at the moment, I don't want to do it. And if I don't want to do it, and if I don't feel that, as someone who has been now straddling 2 generations of theatrical creators, my feet are in the golden era of the American musical theatre. I mean, I was a stagehand on the original production of Camelot.
And you knew all those shows backwards
and
and
I knew all
forwards.
the people. I mean, Alan J. Lerner was a great friend of mine. Michael Stewart was a great friend of mine. The Rodgers and Hammerstein family, I never knew Dick and Oscar, but I've known the family for 25, 30 years. Stephen Sondheim has been one of my oldest friends for ages. I know the great people, and I've been very lucky enough to learn from them. And I've also straddled into what was the last sort of the sort of British period, as it were, except it's not British or American, it's musical theatre. The public don't
You
care.
created that period.
Yeah,
You straddled
but the public
into it.
don't
You and
care
Andrew
where
created
a
it.
show comes from. They just want it to be a good show. I believe that the next, and I think it will happen in the next 5 to 10 years, but I've got a feeling we're in a hiatus period, and because it isn't a coincidence that all the shows around the world at the moment are either great revivals or they're new shows regurgitating existing material.
Right.
Whether
Lion
it's
King,
with the
Beauty and the
exception of
Beast.
Aida, that is what Lion King and Beauty and the
And
Beast
all
are.
the stuff in
and
development
the
now with
producers,
movies.
Right.
That we're going through that kind of period. And that's what's in the air. It's not anyone being particularly clever. That's what people are seeing. And the shows. You talk about what is successful. Well, please God, Oklahoma's going to be hugely successful. My Fair Lady is enormously successful, and I'm thoroughly enjoying doing those shows. But if you look back over my career, every 20 years I do Oliver, which is, by the way, opening again next year in America, and My Fair Lady and Oklahoma. They're my 3 shows that I do I do every 20 years, and I put my name down for my late 70s to do the next one.
Now, would you have given up on new musicals, though, if Witches of Eastwick and Martin Gare were big hits, or was it
listen, Witches of
that those
Eastwick-
didn't make it? Did they sort of knock you out a little bit?
What do you mean they didn't make it?
Well, Witches of Eastwick was not a success in the West End.
No.
Did it
but
make
it's-
money? No.
No. But a lot of shows that succeed. Chicago didn't make money when it was first done. 20 years later, it came back. Pal Joey didn't make money when it first came. Porgy and Bess didn't make money.
You think
you
Witches
can
of
go
Eastwick
on and
will
on.
be a Chicago 20 years from
Who
now?
knows what it'll be? But Witches of Eastwick has got 5 productions opening in the next year. It's going to come to America next year. It's a terrific musical. And only time will tell how successful it is. Martin Gare is opening in Madrid in August in a completely new production. That show will get done again and again. How many people have kept redoing Stephen Sondheim shows, that haven't worked on Broadway? I mean, considering Stephen is the greatest living icon in American musical theatre, it's amazing how you and your colleagues managed to hammer him on Broadway and not recognise it until someone else does a production later.
Yeah, the Kennedy Center, we'll go back, they were all masterpieces.
Yes, but it's complete hypocrisy. You know?
Well,
and I hope Into the Woods is the hugest success that it deserves to be, because it's full of brilliant things, you know?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about you is you are tenacious about shows. I mean, you had Martin Garrett, you opened it first, and then you closed it, and then you reworked it, and I think you reworked it 3 times. You just not give up on a show? Does your show never not work in your eyes?
What do you know, Michael, about the American musical theatre?
Yes, let's ask him.
Do you know anything at all? No. Do you know anything about shows going out of town? How often Hello Dolly was rewritten in Detroit? How much work was done on Carousel or Camelot?
Yes, but when they got together, they came to New York and they opened, and they were big, substantial hits.
We do not have now the ability to take anything other than a huge star vehicle and take it out of town.
Why is that?
Look, because of economics. I mean, look, it's taken Disney, you know, they did a number of workshops with Aida. They did it, I think, somewhere like Atlanta. Or Houston, and decided that they didn't want to do that production. Then they did it again in Chicago, and then they made changes from Chicago to New York, and then they made a success of it. That is normal. Shows opening and miraculously being a success have always been the miracle that we all dream about, but that doesn't happen. And for most people, they don't get the opportunity to do that. That's what people don't understand in this fast food world that we live in.
So you're saying
these are works of art, and it takes all the right circumstances to bring it together.
So are you saying now that the Broadway and the West End, that the West End for Witches of Eastwick was just one place where this show stopped for a little while, and this show will keep being changed and being taken to other places?
No, it isn't going to be changed. We made some changes. We made very little changes. I mean, I made less changes from taking it from Drury Lane to the Prince of Wales Theatre, other than the physical set, because I went from a 1,700 seater to 1,100 seater, than I did bringing Les Miserables to Washington on its pre-Broadway tour. We made huge changes from London. So, you know, we just made small changes and changed one number. The show that we did at the Prince of Wales is the one which got terrific reviews, as the original did get pretty good reviews.
I was there for the opening.
You know, and we got really good reviews the second time round, you know, and the audience loved it. It's just that I didn't have a box office star, which is really, musical comedy is I can't think of many musical comedies that have ever worked unless they've had a huge star, whether it be Bernadette Peters or Mary Martin, Ethel Merman. I mean, you've just got Nathan and Matthew and the producers. There's something about the genre of musical comedy on London and Broadway that is star-driven.
What's your feeling about now that Nathan...
Where dramatic musicals, you know, aren't they? They don't need to be.
Right, no stars in...
Or some youth thing like Rent.
No, I've never had... I've never... Those kind of shows, the show becomes the star as long as you've got fantastic performances.
What is your feeling about the new generation of composers coming up? Jason Robert Brown, Michael John LaChiusa, Ricky Ian Gordon, Adam Gettle, Richard Rodgers' grandson. They've had a number of opportunities. They've had a lot of shows done at the nonprofit theaters. They haven't really seemed to catch on. Do you think?
But they're undoubtedly very talented people. But the thing about just being talented in our business isn't enough. Knowing what to write about and choosing a subject that is going to somehow grab the public by the scruff of the neck is part of the art. Just because you can write a good lyric or an interesting piece of music alone isn't enough. Musicals are about the complete collaboration. You know, I mean, look at Phantom of the Opera. I mean, you know, that has, you know, some of the best music Andrew Lloyd Webber's ever written. It's terrific stuff, and Andrew and I had terrific fun putting it together. But it is a wonderful alchemy of Maria Bjornsson's fantastic set and Andrew Bridges' lighting, and Hal Prince's and Gillian Lynn's consummate staging. If you take any one of those three areas out, you know, I don't think the show would work as well. It doesn't mean that they're the only people that could do it, but it needs talents of that caliber to make that kind of show work.
So what is missing?
As Hello Dolly did with Gower Champion.
So what are these?
Hello Dolly, you know, is redone by someone as clever as Gower Champion, or West Side Story is done by someone as clever as Jerome Robbins, which takes us back to Oklahoma. With Susan Stroman and Trevor Nunn, you have two people who are the modern equivalent
of Agnes DeMille
and Ruben Amulian.
Right.
And that's what it's about, and it's that quotient, and that happens rarely.
What is then missing with these young composers? What's the element that's missing in their shows? Do you think that the subject matter they're attracted to is not commercial enough? But you yourself said you've got to go with what you believe in. What you
are you
want to
saying
do.
you mean really commercial, like
Footloose?
No, T.S. Eliot's poems, commercial, or Victor Hugo's social novel Les Miserables. Really, snappy commercial ideas like that.
The difference, though, is you had a composer in Andrew Lloyd Webber who wrote great, muscular, melodic, great big theatrical songs. I don't know if this young generation of composers, if they write those kind of songs that an audience can hear, like they hear a memory and they want to hear it again and again. And wouldn't you say for a musical to be successful, it's got to have that kind of music?
When Andrew and I went into rehearsal with Trevor to do Cats, memory wasn't in the score. Memory happened, came out, there was a song called Grisabella the Glamour Cat, which was supposed to be her number. And, Trevor said one day, I don't think it's going to give us the musical catharsis we want. Andrew, have you got anything else? And one day, whilst we were doing the final auditions, Andrew came out and sort of played this and says, will this do? And Trevor went looking at his watch. Well, he said, it's 12:20. It'll do very nicely.
By the way, can I write the lyrics so I get a royalty?
So, that isn't, and that happens so often that a show goes out of town or the moment makes the reason. I mean, famously with Comedy Tonight in Funnington Harrand, Send in the Clowns with Little Night Music. Right. Bring Him Home, we'd been rehearsing 12 or 10 weeks at the time that Bring Him Home was suddenly needed to be conjured up for Jean Valjean, because we realised the poor man was carrying everybody around this set for hours on end and didn't have an aria to sing on the barricade, So that's how the theatre works.
That's how it comes together, yeah.
I mean, when Oliver started, in rehearsals, there were 4 songs or 5 songs. The rest was written for it in rehearsal.
We just have a couple of minutes left. I want to talk about the business and how it's changed. We have now the collapse of Garth Drabinsky's Live End, but in the wake of that has emerged this behemoth known as Clear Channel. Big corporation that owns most of the road now and is producing a lot of shows. Is this really the corporate takeover of Broadway we are finally seeing? And can you produce shows from a corporate mentality?
I think the great thing about the theatre is it's always picked itself up from death when some individual, be a director, producer, or a writer, have come up with the maddest idea and turned it into something wonderful. Mm-hmm. And corporations never collectively do that. They might well bankroll it, but Disney were very, very smart when they put all their money for The Lion King on Julie Taymor. Right. They realized that if you want to make something special, you had to go with someone with a particular vision. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, they were one of the very few people that could afford to allow someone like that to do it, and that is one of the great problems with the modern musical theatre, is that there are only a handful of people that have the wherewithal to back their own vision. The saddest thing I see when I go around the West End, around the Broadway theatre now, is looking at posters. I'm going into a lobby and seeing that there are more people above the title than there are in the show. And I go, it just is like
20 producers.
Why? For me, the theatre's about David Merrick Presents, because all right, he can be a monster, whereas I'm absolutely delightful and sweet, but. The point is, he had a point of view, and he had one point of view. And all the artists know that they're interfacing to that. And too many people in the theatre have no point of view, and therefore are looking to each other to get it. And you don't get a point of view by consensus; you get it by instinct, and then you should run with it.
That's a life lesson for the theatre. It's been instructional, Cameron. Thank you for setting me straight on so
And I
many
hope a little
things.
humbling.
This amateur was pleased to have you on Theatre Talk tonight. Cameron Mackintosh, it's a great pleasure to see you, and good luck with Oklahoma.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time on Theatre Talk, and now we will close with Cameron Mackintosh's Oklahoma. Good night.
The farmer and the cowman should be friends. Oh, the farmer and the cowman should be friends. One man likes to push a plow, the other likes to chase a cow, but that's no reason why they can't be friends. Territory
Talk is made possible in part by the Friedrich Loewe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Dinelli Charitable Fund, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Lucille Lortel Foundation, and public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
Playbill Online is the official website of Theater Talk and the home of the Playbill Club, providing information and opportunities for theater lovers. We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.